1968. Backstage at the Ryman Auditorium, Nashville. Johnny Cash stands in front of a cracked mirror. His hands shake so badly he can't fasten the buttons on his black shirt. Sweat runs down his spine. Behind the door, 10 minutes away, a sold-out Grand Ole Opry crowd waits for him to walk on stage. His manager just said 3 words that didn't sound angry. They sounded final. "Johnny, you're done." 48 hours earlier, Cash weighed 150 pounds at 6'2". He hadn't slept in 3 days. Columbia Records was quietly preparing the paperwork to end his contract. June Carter had turned down his proposal for the 5th time that year. And the night before, a stranger in a Memphis bar told him something so precise it felt like a verdict, not an insult. Cash looks at his reflection and doesn't recognize the man staring back. He knows he can't go on stage like this. He also knows that if he walks away now, there may be no coming back. What happens in the next 6 hours will either end Johnny Cash forever, or turn him into something no one, including himself, thought he could be. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. The week Jackson climbed to number 2, Johnny Cash could still walk into a studio and make grown men go quiet. Columbia wanted another hit. Up close, it wasn't a victory. His suit hung loose, his cheeks were sharp, his fingers trembled when he tried to strike a match. Sleep came in scraps, and those scraps brought visions. Headlights outside the window, footsteps in hallways, a certainty that someone was tracking every stumble. In December 1967, he vanished mid-session and stayed gone for 36 hours. The band waited with guitars across their knees, loyal but worn down. Producer Bob Johnston drove past downtown Nashville into the edge of town where neon signs buzzed over parking lots. He found Cash in a motel room with the curtains pinned shut. Every mirror was smashed. Bathroom, dresser, even the small one above the sink, glass dusting the carpet like ice. On the stained bedspread, Johnston counted the tablets Cash had been carrying, 78 amphetamines. Beside them, a note folded small. "Vivian was right. You're a fake." Cash wouldn't look at his own reflection, even if it survived. "I can still sing," he said, voice thin. Johnston didn't argue. He just told him to come back before the label decided for him. January took him to Lafayette, Louisiana, a hall packed with 3,000 people. He walked out, the band hit Folsom Prison Blues, and the first 2 verses landed the way they always had. Hard, sure, practiced. Then his voice stopped in mid-line. 15 seconds of silence. Cash stared into the front row at a man in prison denim, freshly released from Louisiana State Penitentiary. The man didn't cheer or heckle. He only looked back with flat, steady eyes that said, "Without words, I believed you." Cash leaned into the microphone. "I can't do this anymore." He walked off. The band stood frozen under the lights. By morning, the papers called it a nervous collapse. But Cash knew what had happened. He'd sung about cages for years, and for the first time he'd met the face of someone who'd lived one. Weeks later, at 3 in the morning, he sat alone at Ernestine and Hazel's in Memphis with a coffee he didn't want. An older black musician slid onto the stool beside him, someone who'd known the Sun Records hallway before the legends got polished. He studied Cash's trembling hands and said, "Johnny, you sing about prisons, but you're locked up in fear. Fear of being yourself." Cash bristled. The man kept going. "Elvis traded himself for Vegas. You're trading yourself for pills. Same deal." Cash stepped outside into the river air. He realized the paranoia wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the quiet moment after the noise, when he still didn't know who he was without the character. By dawn, he lay on a hotel bed, sweating through the sheets, jaw locked against the craving. June Carter's last words, love tied to an ultimatum, rang louder than the traffic. He didn't want applause. He wanted one honest hour where he couldn't run. When the phone finally rang, he grabbed it like a lifeline, and Bob Johnston's voice came through. "I've got a place where you can't fake it, Johnny. If you're brave enough to walk in." Bob Johnston didn't bring the idea gently. He dropped it into the room like a match. A live album. Inside a prison. Folsom. Cash laughed first. Short, dry, without humor. "You're out of your mind. Columbia will shut it down before you finish the sentence." Johnston didn't blink. "They don't know. I already talked to the warden. January 13th. If we don't do this, they'll shut you down instead." Cash leaned back, eyes hollow. "Why?" "Because I heard Lafayette," Johnston said. "You didn't freeze because you were broken. You froze because you were lying. To the wrong people." That night Cash sat alone, counting hours without pills. 11 days clean. The longest stretch in 4 years. His body felt flayed, skin buzzing, muscles jumping, sleep replaced by jolts of panic. In a Folsom motel room the phone rang. Vivian's voice, calm but edged. "The girls saw you on television." Kathy said, "That isn't our dad." Silence stretched. "Is she wrong?" Cash couldn't answer. Vivian exhaled once. "Then make tomorrow mean something." The line went dead. Morning came early. Cash arrived at the prison before sunrise, 2 hours ahead of schedule. The air smelled of cold concrete and disinfectant. An officer led him through corridors where footsteps echoed too long, past steel doors and narrow windows. Cells slid by like frames of a film. Men slept on bunks, faces turned to walls. Cash stopped. One cell held a man sitting upright, writing a letter with careful concentration. Same age, same tired posture. Cash asked quietly, "What's he in for?" "Murder," the guard said. "Came back from Vietnam. Found his wife with another man. Life." The man looked up. Their eyes met. No challenge, no plea, just recognition. Cash felt it hit his chest. Not guilt, not fear, but responsibility. He walked on without a word, hands steady for the first time in weeks. The dining hall was a low-ceilinged box of sound. Microphones were taped down, cables snaked across the floor. The equipment was basic, almost crude. Every cough would be captured. There would be no hiding. The prisoners filed in, skeptical, arms folded, waiting for a show they didn't trust. June sat near the side, not smiling, not rescuing him with encouragement, just watching. Cash understood the message. This was his step alone. When it was time, he stood behind the curtain and felt a different fear rise. Not of failure, but of honesty. The guard nodded. The curtain moved. 800 faces turned toward him, measuring. Cash took one breath and stepped forward, knowing there would be no second take, no character to slip into, only the truth, and whatever it cost to speak it. He stepped into the dining hall, and the noise fell apart into pockets of breath and shifting boots. "Hello, I'm Johnny Cash." The words landed flat, almost fragile, and before the band could settle, he launched into Folsom Prison Blues. The opening line came out strong. The second bent. By the third, his voice cracked and died in his throat. Silence. Not polite, not hostile. Alert. 800 men waited to see what he would do next. Cash lowered his head, then looked up again, eyes moving from face to face. "I've been lying to you," he said, not loud, not planned. Guards stiffened along the walls. "I never did time, but I know what it's like to build a cage and live inside it." Bob Johnston glanced toward the control table, fingers hovering. He didn't cut the tape. Cash nodded once, almost to himself, and started again. Same song. Different weight. The concrete walls threw his voice back at him, rough and alive. Each word traveled, hit stone, and returned altered, truer. When the band slid into Cocaine Blues, something shifted. Cash sang the line about Reno without softening it, without apology. The room erupted, not laughter, not mockery, but recognition. A roar that said, "We hear you." One inmate near the back dropped his head and covered his face. His name was Glenn Shirley. He didn't cry because it was shocking. He cried because no one had ever spoken about his world without pretending. The guards exchanged looks. The band played harder, sensing the current. Cash watched the men lean forward, arms uncrossing, bodies loosening. This wasn't entertainment. It was contact. He felt it when eyes stayed locked on him, when no one shouted for something else, when the room breathed together. The equipment struggled, levels peaking, microphones catching echoes they weren't meant to, but the flaws gave the sound edges. Nothing was smoothed over. Every cheer, every scrape of a chair lived on the tape. After the final song, Cash didn't leave. He asked to stay. The request surprised everyone, including himself. 20 minutes in the yard, no stage, no set list. Men stepped forward, some awkward, some blunt. One approached quietly, the man Cash had seen writing that morning. "I was writing to my son," he said. "Didn't know what to tell him." Cash asked what he would write now. The man didn't hesitate. "That mistakes don't make you small. They make you responsible." The bus ride back stretched long and quiet. No pills, no chatter. June sat beside him and held his hand without speaking. Miles passed. Finally Cash said, "I know what I have to do." "What?" she asked. "Stop playing Johnny Cash," he said, "and be John Cash." Outside, the road unwound toward Nashville. Inside, something had already turned. Bob Johnston carried the master tape into Columbia's New York office like evidence. The room was glass and leather, insulated from the noise of the city and, more importantly, from the country itself. Executives leaned back as the reel began to turn. 3 minutes in, Clive Davis raised a hand. "Stop." He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The sound is unacceptable. Prisoners yelling obscenities, distortion everywhere, and Cash sounds unstable. Johnston stayed standing. He was unstable. That's the point. Davis shook his head. "Radio won't touch this. Advertisers won't touch it. This isn't bravery. It's commercial suicide." A younger A&R assistant spoke before he could stop himself. 24, fresh out of Berkeley, sleeves rolled up like the world hadn't taught him caution yet. "My father did time in San Quentin," he said. "If you don't hear what this is saying, you don't understand America right now." Silence followed. No decision. Just delay. While Columbia hesitated, the music moved anyway. Copies slipped out. Engineers, DJs, friends of friends. One night in San Francisco, Tom Big Daddy Donahue put the whole concert on air after midnight. Phones lit up. Not requests. Confessions. A mother whose son was locked up. A veteran who couldn't sleep. A woman who said the shouting made her feel less alone. By morning, the Chronicle ran a headline no one at Columbia could control. April arrived with fire. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered, and the country cracked open. Columbia panicked. "This is the worst possible moment," Davis said. "An album about prisoners?" Cash didn't argue. He called a press conference instead. Reporters expected politics. He gave them a name: Glenn Shirley. "He wrote a song I sang at Folsom," Cash said. "If we talk about equality, who do we leave out?" Pressure mounted. Columbia offered a deal. Release Folsom, but only if Cash recorded a clean studio album as insurance. He agreed, then collapsed under the weight of it. In a Los Angeles hotel, June found him shaking, 15 dexedrine deep, 40 hours without sleep. "You promised," she said. "I can't hold this together," he whispered. She slapped him once, not in anger, in refusal. "You already broke it," she said. "Right now." The ultimatum followed. Rehab or goodbye. Traditional clinics had failed him. Then a call came from Reverend Jimmy Snow in Tennessee. No doctors, no pills, quiet, work, truth. Cash laughed, then stopped laughing. He packed without ceremony. As the city fell away behind him, Cash didn't know if he was running or choosing to stand still. He only knew that the war had begun. Not with the label, not with the press, but with the part of himself that still wanted to hide. Evandale wasn't treatment. It was absence. One road, one church, a lake that stayed still long enough to make noise unbearable. Reverend Snow met Cash without ceremony and pointed to an old parsonage by the water. "No phone, no visitors. Food's at the church, if you're ready to speak honestly." That was the intake. Nothing else. The first night split him open. At 2 a.m, the sickness surged. Nausea, sweating, flashes of sound that weren't there. He ran barefoot to the lake with a single clear thought. End the noise. The water was colder than he expected. It punched the breath out of him and held him there, chest deep, shaking, until dawn leaked in gray over the trees. An old man fished from the bank, eyes on the line. "Tomorrow's easier," he said without looking. "That's a lie, but you need one." Weeks crawled. Cash lost weight before he gained it back. Sleep came in fragments, then longer stretches. The paranoia thinned, leaving a quieter terror. Memory. He didn't write songs. He wrote letters. One to Glenn Shirley at Folsom. Careful, plain. One to his daughters. No excuses. One to himself. A list of 23 rules. The first cut clean. The last demanded patience he didn't trust himself to have. June came to Evandale but didn't knock on his door. She spoke to Snow instead. "Is he changing?" she asked. Snow answered carefully. "He's stopped lying. That's not the same as fixed." She asked to see him. Snow refused for him. "He has to walk to you." June left, unsure whether that was mercy or cruelty. In September, Bob Johnston drove up with news. The album had been out a week. 300,000 copies. #1 in country. Cash listened without smiling. "If I go back for that," he said, "I'll lose this." Johnston argued. Cash didn't. He stayed. October brought a test he chose. He went back to the lake at dusk and sang Folsom Prison Blues into the trees. No band, no audience. The song held. His voice didn't wobble. He stayed. On October 22nd, he returned to Nashville and knocked on June's door. He didn't ask for marriage. He asked for time. 1 year, she said. No lies, no disappearances. He agreed. November put him on a small Memphis stage. 200 people, no safety. He told them the truth before the first note. Then he sang, slower, exposed. It wasn't a comeback. It was proof of work done in silence, and work still ahead. Sobriety didn't arrive like relief. It arrived like responsibility. December came with Christmas lights and an invitation Cash didn't know if he deserved. Vivian allowed him one day with the girls. He stood in the doorway with wrapped gifts and steady hands, feeling like a guest in a life he'd damaged. Kathy looked up and asked, "Dad, are you staying?" "Not for dinner, for good." Cash froze. Roseanne answered for him, too quickly, too practiced. "He can't, but he'll come back." Cash saw it then. She wasn't trusting him. She was protecting the younger ones. "I will come back," he said. "I keep promises now." Roseanne nodded, unconvinced. January brought a letter from Folsom. Glenn Shirley wrote about hearing Greystone Chapel on the radio, about guards letting it play, about crying because something he made wasn't violent. Cash read it twice, then showed it to June. "I owe him," he said. She corrected him. "You owe yourself to stay clean." Cash wrote back anyway, and promised something risky. Another prison show. San Quentin. If Shirley was there, he would sing his song again. Touring tested him in smaller, sharper ways. Hotel rooms at 2 a.m. were the worst. In Chicago, he picked up the phone and dialed a number he knew by muscle memory. The dealer said he'd be there in 20 minutes. Cash sat by the window, watching headlights. 19 minutes later, June called. No reason given. He broke. She stayed on the line while he walked the streets until dawn. The car never came. He went back to the room empty and intact. A BC came next, with an offer no one refused lightly. A television show. Cash listened, then set terms. No censorship of guests, no cleanup of songs that mattered. The network hesitated. He didn't. The first broadcast paired him with Bob Dylan. No speeches, just two voices and the truth between them. Ratings answered the argument. February delivered San Quentin. Bigger, louder, harsher. Cash stood under lights again, but this time he knew where to look. "This song was written by a man here tonight," he said, and sang to Glenn Shirley's face. Afterward, they met briefly. Shirley asked why. Cash answered simply, "Because you did it for me." October crept toward June's deadline. On the last night he arrived late, empty-handed. No ring, no speech. June smiled anyway. "You didn't run," she said. He asked the question without kneeling, without jewelry, without escape. She said yes, not because the year was perfect, but because he stayed when it wasn't. The wedding was small by Nashville standards, quiet enough to hear shoes on the church floor. What mattered wasn't the vows, but who stood near the door, unsure if he belonged. Glenn Shirley had been paroled days earlier. 11 years inside had taught him rules that didn't work out here. Cash saw him hovering and walked over. "I'm glad you came," he said, as if it required no courage at all. Shirley nodded, overwhelmed. Freedom, it turned out, was louder than prison. Cash hired him as a road hand soon after. Not charity, work. The road, however, moved too fast. Shirley startled at open spaces, slept poorly without constant noise, mistrusted kindness. One night in Texas, he vanished. Cash found him hours later in a park, sitting under a tree, shaking. "I don't know how to do this," Shirley said. Cash sat beside him. "Neither did I," he answered. "One choice at a time." The television show climbed. Millions watched every week as Cash brought on voices that didn't fit neat categories. Singers who'd been blacklisted, writers who asked uncomfortable questions. Letters poured in, some furious, some grateful. He read both. At home, the work was quieter. Roseanne visited for a month. The first days were stiff. Then she asked what he'd never expected her to ask. "Did you want to die?" He didn't soften it. "Yes." She waited. "Do you still?" "I decide not to," he said. She hugged him without ceremony. In January 1971, the phone rang at 3 a.m. Shirley had been arrested after a bar fight, self-defense, but parole didn't care. Cash sat across from him at the station. Shirley stared at the floor. "People think you're using me," he said. Cash didn't rush to deny it. He thought, then answered honestly, "Sometimes I tried to save you instead of letting you live." They parted without anger, each knowing the other couldn't walk the path for him. Years later, another call came. Shirley was gone. Cash stood at the funeral with too few people and said what he could carry. That Shirley fought longer than most, that failure wasn't the measure of a life. He went home quieter than before. In 1984, a letter arrived from a 19-year-old at Folsom. Simple words, gratitude, a reason to keep going. Cash held it while June read over his shoulder. "This is what lasts," she said. He wrote back with no advice, just steadiness. One day at a time. That evening he took his guitar onto the porch and played softly as the sun dropped. He hadn't conquered the dark. He'd learned to walk with it. And in doing so, he left a light behind for people he would never meet.